if we get going.
Pro- Proceed.
Awesome.
You
And
ready
then
for
yeah, I'll do Dr. Just before I do it. So Dr. Brian Goldman, host of the White Coat Black Art and host of the podcast, The Dose, an emergency room doctor at Mount Sinai.
Yeah, and author of The Power of Teamwork, if you want to say that. You might as well.
Throw it in there. Throw it on the pile.
Throw it on the pile. Oh, and it's not the white coat, it's White Coat Black Art. No article in front of it, definite or otherwise.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, cool. I think I'm ready to go here.
So am I.
Awesome. Okay, I am recording in 5, 4, 3.
Welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is Dr. Brian Goldman, who's very, very well accomplished. So he's the author of The Power of, sorry, I'm going to kind of mess that up there, Brian. What is it? Actually, Mike, do you want to just restart it? We've never done this before, but do you want to just restart it? That's okay.
Yeah.
Author of Teamwork. Sorry, I had it written down and I couldn't read my own writing.
He's so accomplished, we can't get this whole intro done.
You're a doctor. You can't read your own writing like me.
So, Mike, you just let me know when you're ready, and we'll take it from the top. That never happened.
That literally is the first time that's happened.
Brian, this is like that minute that happened after Austin scored last night.
Just such a big guess, Brian, and just making me nervous, you know?
He is intimidating.
Okay, we'll try it again. Countdown, Mike.
Sure. I'm recording in 5, 4, 3.
So welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. My guest today is Dr. Brian Goldman, who's the author of Power of Teamwork, the host of White Coat Black Art, and also the host of the podcast, The Dose. In addition to that, he's also an emergency room doctor at Mount Sinai. So, Doc, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, Mike.
Well, we're really happy to have you here today. I know that you've got a lot going on, and you got this new book or newish book that's been put out, and just kind of curious, like what made you decide to write this book?
Well, the book, by the way, you're getting a head start. This is one of my first interviews on talking about the book. The book's going to be published in April, so you're getting a sneak preview. I wanted to write the book kind of as a sequel to my last book, which was The Power of Kindness. Basically, The Power of Kindness was my search for empathy and kindness in some of the most kind and empathic people around the planet. And I traveled far and wide to be able to write that book. And it came from a personal story of being accused of unkindness by a family of a patient who I saw while working as an emergency physician. And the thing about that is that, if people who don't work in medicine accuse you of incompetence, there's a good chance they might be wrong. There's so many shades of gray when it comes to that. There's arguments for and against, lawsuits. You have witnesses for the plaintiff and you have witnesses for the defense. So there's often a difference of opinion. But when somebody accuses you of unkindness, they've kind of got you busted. Because I think everybody knows kindness when they see it. They know unkindness or brusqueness when they see it. So I wrote that book to the heart. And it was really a heartfelt book with lots of great stories about how I, found, my own lost kindness and how I worked to recover it. The power of teamwork is more to the head than to the heart. It is about something that is lacking in healthcare, and that is true teamwork. First of all, I had to discover what teamwork is. Right at the beginning of the book, I ask a rhetorical question. Do you work on a team or do you work in a group? And that question is not just to people in healthcare like you and I, but also to people who are in sales, who are in the service industry, entertainment, journalism, law enforcement, the military, what have you. And there's a good chance we all talk about the virtues of teamwork. Teamwork is good. Teamwork makes the dream work. We all have our aphorisms or slogans, but many of us have never experienced true teamwork. Teamwork is about everybody having a shared goal. And everybody on the team is recognized for their talents and abilities. We don't have one-upmanship. We don't have competition on a team. And when there's a shared goal, everybody feels this sense of ecstasy for a job well done. The kind of ecstasy that you hear about rarely in healthcare when they pull off one of these multi-patient transplants, or when Siamese twins are successfully separated in a 19-hour operation, and you have this massive team working and they all say, "We did it. We did it." Or when a sports team wins a championship. The Cinderella team, like the St. Louis Blues a few years ago, went from dead last to a Stanley Cup in about 4 months' time, with a brand new coach at that time. The thing is that many of us have never been on a team. We're in a group. And you can tell when you're in a group, when the people assembled around the meeting room are jockeying for position, in competing with one another, and either making themselves look good or making somebody else in the group look bad by comparison. And that's not a team. You work in a group and not a team if your regular meetings are a place where great ideas go to die because somebody in the room says, "You're just the junior member of this group. You have no right to contribute ideas, so we're going to discount it." Or that was disproved, in medical rounds or a medical monthly meeting. We tried that last year and it didn't work. Somebody comes up with a suggestion. And in other words, they dampen creativity and they dampen the enthusiasm for people to point out something like, "If you continue down that road, I'm afraid this patient might be harmed." So I wanted to write a book about the fledgling journey from me to we, from, the doctor's mindset. I mean, and you tell me if I'm wrong. Did you kind of get this inference in medical school? I alone am going to walk into the room and everybody's gotten the diagnosis wrong and I'm going to get it right.
I think there's a lot of in medicine that you want to be the one to kind of find out the right diagnosis. You kind of want to be the man. You kind of want to be the one to sort of stand out. And there's, a lot of competition in medical school. And it's a lot about, being better than your peers, maybe as opposed to being, what's best for the patient and for medicine in general. And I feel I'm just kind of thinking back to medical school now, and even for me, it's over 10 years ago or so. So I definitely can see that it's all about who's getting the highest marks in the class, and even sometimes in residency, and the people get excited about, "Oh, I picked the right drug," as opposed to "Oh, I saved this patient," which is obviously much more powerful. And as you said, the shared goal, because if you all have a shared goal of, let's do the very best thing for this patient, then that's going to, I hope anyway, decrease some of the individual competitiveness, and then, you'll be able to provide better overall care for that patient. I think that's, hopefully maybe some of the messaging that you were trying to convey maybe in your books.
Absolutely. And, it makes perfect sense if the most competitive people, the most successful people at competition got into medical school. Does it surprise you or me that they would continue that competitive streak all the way through? Because that's how they're going to get the best residencies. That's how they're going to get the best staff appointments. And so none of that surprises me. What will surprise people, I think, is just how much group cognition, team cognition, that is superior to individual cognition when it comes to making the diagnosis, formulating a treatment plan. And the more complicated patients become, the more teamwork helps make things better, not just because of shared goals, but because it's actually more fun. It's more fun. For instance, when I'm working with a nurse practitioner, a medical student, a resident, a junior resident, a senior resident, a physician assistant, my thoughts are better because they resonate against, they bounce off of other people. Mm-hmm. And I describe how that process goes. So the book is all about how you undo some of that individual streak, that streakiness, and embrace the team, and why you would want to embrace the team, and the ways to do it. And there's some really crazy ways to do it. One way is improv comedy. And there are medical school programs where they teach improv comedy exercises. as a way to get people to support each other instead of detracting from each other. You know, for instance, probably you may have heard of the game Yes and. This is an improv technique where two people are on stage beside each other, and their job is to support one another. So you know, one person is maybe given like a topic, and they say something, and whatever that person says, the other person must respond yes and. So they tacitly agree with it, accept it, and add to it. And then the other person goes yes and. And the whole idea there is that you're trying to make your partner look good, and you're trying to support them, and what you're doing is building up a shared goal. The polar opposite of that is yes, but. So you know, that's what you get in medical meetings. You know, for instance, why don't we try using this kind of alarm system? And somebody else says, yes, but we tried that last year and it didn't work. So that's an idea killer. Whereas yes and builds on it. And then the worst thing you can do is say no. If you just say no, that doesn't work, end of story. What it does is it dampens people's enthusiasm for calling it like it is as they see it. And so that's just one thing you can do. Other things that I talk about in the book are playing games, doing simulations, going to art class. There are medical school programs that teach something called visual thinking strategies, where you get a group of medical students in front of a work of art. And there is a facilitator who asks 3 questions. What do you see? And each person says what they see, and the facilitator elaborates and paraphrases. And the next question they ask is, what makes you think you see what you see? That's the creative thinking part of it, the critical, so not the creative, the critical thinking part of it. And then the third question they ask is, what more can we see? What more can we find? And what this is trying to build for this fledgling group of people, this fledgling team, is to teach them how to make observations to one another without fear that they're going to be ridiculed or criticized. And none of them have a major in art. None of them are art majors. In fact, you don't have to know about art. You just have to see what you see and be able to kind of justify what you see.
Okay. So in a lot of ways, then, I mean, from my understanding, like, you obviously still believe in, you know, hierarchies 100%, but at the same time, you know, even though there are hierarchies in medicine, we can still all be on the same team and have the same goal. And even though you may be in a different hierarchy than someone else, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have the same goal as the person who is below you or the person who is, you know, ahead of you. And, you know, we're saying hierarchies in medicine, and people in medicine can probably relate to this, because, you know, there's medical students, third year, fourth year, PGY2, PGY3, PGY, you know, all that kind of thing. And it's sort of like very, you know, easily delegated. But also too, and people in business companies have bosses below them, they have people beneath them. And, you know, I think that it's important to have those hierarchies, but you have to have the self-awareness that when you are creating a hierarchy, you may also be, you know, creating something where you're going to be creating a group, as you put it, as opposed to a team. So I think it's important when, you know, not only in medicine, but in other business ventures and any type of group, that if you are going to create a hierarchy, and we can, you know, talk to, if you want to, about the importance of having a hierarchy, that when you do that, you make sure that everyone is still working on the same team together, as opposed to working individually or in a group or competitively against one another.
So, Mike, so first of all, yes, and you are absolutely correct. Hierarchies exist, and they do not preclude teamwork. And you can, you know, one can appreciate the contributions of everybody on the team wherever they sit on the hierarchy. Everybody's got a superpower, and we weaponize praise when we only praise the so-called praiseworthy, the people who have the most grant money, the people who do the most, crank out the most research papers, the people who have the highest qualifications. And we're missing the fact that everybody has a superpower, whether it's human relations or whether it's in executive function and in planning, preparation, making sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, for instance. So we can praise everybody's superpower. We can always do that. But the other thing I want to say about hierarchies is the absolute limit of hierarchical thinking. And that is when it's rigid, there can be problems. And one of the chapters that I write about is.
Wait, can I just interrupt you on that? Brian, I just wanted to make this point because you talked about comedy earlier, and I didn't mention it, and you're also talking about rigidity too. Like, I think it's wonderful that these schools are incorporating comedy into what they're doing. And the reason I say that is because, yeah, sure, it's great to laugh. It's good for a bunch of different, physiological reasons, and we can, talk about those for sure. But I think that one thing though too is that it opens you up a little bit more. And when you get rigid, you kind of get rigid in your thinking. So, you may think that, I've used this certain class of drugs before, this one specific drug before, and so I'm going to keep on using this. And that's kind of creates this sort of like rigid sort of mental state that you have where you're not as open to learning. But I think that if you have if there's jokes going on all day, you're a little bit loose, you're a little bit more open, you're probably going to be more open to say some ideas that may go against what you believe. Whereas if you are in this sort of like, rigid state all the time, you're probably not going to be as like receptive to other people, and you're not going to learn as much. And if you don't learn as much and learn new information, then that's going to translate into, worse overall care for your patients. And I just was, wondering if you noticed that when comedy has been incorporated into medical schools and into the medical curriculum, if it made the students maybe feel a little bit more loose, open, maybe even social in some ways, and just receptive to learning something that maybe they didn't think that they should learn or needed to learn before.
Absolutely. They are more open to a number of things. They're, the most important thing that they're more open to is the willingness to contribute ideas and the willingness to risk potentially making a fool of themselves. And it's not just improv comedy. There are places like Thomas Jefferson University in the United States in Philadelphia, where they have classes in improvisational drumming. And so drumming, percussion, one of the stated goals of this program is to teach medical students that it's okay to make a fool of themselves in front of their cohort, their classmates. And it's that risk taking that generates better ideas and increases cohesiveness among the team. I don't want to get too far away from this, that I wanted to make one point about rigid hierarchies that I think is really important.
Sure.
There's a chapter on what aviation can teach healthcare, not just about patient safety, but about teamwork. And there's something called crew resource management, which is a whole system that has everybody on the flight and outside the flight with a stake in its success. So the pilots, the cockpit crew, the cabin crew, the maintenance crew, the air traffic controllers, and the passengers and their families, everybody with a stake in it, feeling comfortable contributing observations that could have a bearing on the safety of that flight. And where did that come from? It came from a number of crashes that occurred, airline crashes that occurred from the 50s to the 80s. And one of the major problems and most of them, we thought most of them might be due to technology. They weren't. They were due to human factors, and communication was at the top. Bad communication or faulty communication at the top of the list. And some of those systems had very rigid hierarchies in which a navigator or a co-pilot was afraid to tell the pilot, if we stay on this heading at this altitude, we're going to slam into a mountain. And that's exactly what happened. There's a very famous example of a Korean Airlines flight where one of the factors in the disaster that was cited by the Transportation Safety Board flight investigators was a lack of communication and a fear on the underling's part, on the navigator's part, to challenge the pilot, because that wasn't done in that culture. And that fortunately has changed. And crew resource management is one of the reasons for the development of that was to try to improve faulty communication.
So Brian, say if you're working in a company, or say, you're a medical student and there's someone above you that you feel is, making a mistake and you want to say something, how would you go about saying that? Like, what is your approach?
Well, that is that's a very, very difficult question because, before I say it, I don't want to answer that question and leave people the impression that it's always easy, because there are clearly environments where if you said that, you'd probably be killing your career prospects. And quite recently, in fact, on White Coat Black Art, we had once an anonymous resident talking about a student who pointed out that the way that the hand surgeon was doing the operation was going to cause or contribute to nerve damage. And that senior resident went to the student afterwards and said, "Boy, have you got a lot to learn about how to talk to attendings. Don't ever do that again." And I mean, it's crazy, but that's exactly what happens. So how do you do it? I think if you are going to try to do it, you probably want to be as non-threatening as you can. And you probably don't want to tell that person in a room full of other people where they might immediately feel embarrassed or ashamed, because there's a lot of shame in healthcare. There's a lot of unresolved shame where just the specter of having an error of yours just talked about like that is enough to make you want to slink away. And when that happens, all learning stops. So I guess if you had the chutzpah to do that, you'd probably want to get that person alone and just say, if I thought I saw something that was harmful, would you want me to say it? Would you want me to tell you? I would start that way. In other words, I'd tiptoe up to it and not hit people over the head, keeping in mind that, medical drama, scripted medical dramas like Grey's Anatomy and other shows, they have conflict and they have people screaming at each other in ways that we never do we? We would never say, "You killed that patient, damn it." We would never say that.
Like that ever. Yeah, I've never seen something like that. And the way that I was going to just comment, my approach would be is like, for sure, I totally agree with you that, the more private you can be, the better. So, definitely not like in front of like, a bunch of other people. And then also too, like, I would probably bring it up in a way where I'm not even suggesting that they were doing anything like incorrectly. Like if they were like, "Oh, what were you, reading on last night?" I'd just be like, "Oh, I was reading on this hand surgeon technique that's been shown to kind of like reduce some nerve damage or complications in surgeries, and this is kind of cool." And I probably wouldn't even say at the end like, "Hey," like, I definitely wouldn't say at the end like, "Hey, you should read it," or anything like that. I would
yeah.
I would just like bring it to their attention without criticizing them in any way, shape, or form, or without being negative. I would just try to like bring it up so that they are aware of this technique. And maybe if it's like brought up in there, and also too, make sure you do it when they're in like a good like emotional state. Like if they look like they're like super pissed off or something, like they're not going to want to hear about something different than what they're doing. But if they're in like a really good mood and you have a certain relationship with them, then when you bring it up, it can be better. And like I agree with you 100% when you said that at the beginning. Like there's no like perfect technique a way to do this, and there's no way that like you or I or anyone else listening to this is gonna do that like correctly 100% of the time. Like it's really, really difficult. All you can do is just try to figure out ways that really increase your overall percentage of it being effective most of the time. And I think, again, just to kind of recap some of the things for people listening are like, don't do it in front of people. Don't do it in like a direct manner, like, you were wrong, this is right. Just sort of like bring it up in like an indirect manner, like, "Oh, I was just kind of reading something sort of like interesting." And then also too, wait for your moment of opportunity, so to speak, just by reading their body language. So
Yep.
Don't do it when they're upset, do it when they're in a better mood. And then also too, you have to think about your relationship with that particular person. Like there's going to be some attendings that are going to be much, much more receptive than others. And that's something that you're just going to have to, accept in some ways, like you're going to get through to more people than to others. And there may even be a small percentage of people, unfortunately, that you don't get through to at all, but it's hopefully that's a very, very small percentage. But I think it's just important for people to understand that like this isn't and I know that you're not claiming this at all either, Brian, that it's not a foolproof process, but there are ways that you can, make your percentage go from 0 to 50% or 0 maybe to 75%. You may not get like 100% of the time, but there definitely are ways that can minimize the risk and increase your chances of getting through to the other person.
Now, Mike, who's really good at indirect communication in the emergency department? I would say nurses. Emergency nurses are terrific at that. We once had somebody on White Coat Black Art doing like basically a riff on what she called nurse speak. Okay. So for instance, somebody who's relatively inexperienced starts to do something in the resuscitation room, and the nurse says, "Well, I've never seen it done that way before," which is code for stop what you're doing. You're about to kill the patient. Or something like that, or that looks really dangerous. So I mean, and they can make it stick if they haven't started working in, if they've got experience, so that they're valued for their experience. And even though they don't practice medicine, they've seen lots of docs over the years do something very similar, handle similar kind of patient in the emergency department over the last 15 years, so they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I agree with you 100%, because I've seen, nurses do that before too. And a lot of them are very, they're very careful with their words. And when they do speak, especially like an experienced nurse like that, I think a lot of the doctors, will tend to, listen. So again, you can't, unfortunately just become an experienced person overnight. But again, coming back to some of like, the techniques and stuff that we were using, like if you are more experienced, you probably are going to have a little bit of an easier time, maybe possibly getting that message through than if you're just starting out. And I know for some people starting out, that's kind of like hard to hear, but again, like it's just one of the harsh-ish kind of like lessons of life that you just have to understand, is that when you're younger and less credentialed, less people and less experienced, less people are going to listen to you than when you're older and credentialed. I guess you don't have too many credentials considering all the plaques behind you there. Hey, Brian.
Oh, those are just, that's just a backdrop for my podcast. If you zoomed in on them and sharpened the focus, you'd probably be less impressed.
How many of them do you have? I mean,
no, it's just a bunch of stuff. That's all. It's just some awards I've had over the years, I guess.
That's awesome. So we've talked a little bit about the power of teamwork, but what about your other book on Unkindness? Can we chat a little bit about that and what kind of like the main premise of that is?
Sure. The main premise of The Power of Kindness is that I think a lot of us ask, particularly in midlife, am I still a kind soul? Am I a kind soul at all? Because we've caught ourselves in the act of being brusque, being impatient, tired, sleep deprived, especially during COVID, burned out, and feeling like we're being pulled and pushed in a million different directions, and lots of procedures that we've had to adopt, like putting on PPE and being while being terrified that we make a mistake and end up giving COVID to our families or getting it ourselves. And all of that, and time pressure and complexity and multiple passwords that you have to know, and technological changes to medicine that force us to learn new things all the time and adapt and constantly adapt in a culture that says, yep, one more, sure, we can do it. Sure, let's dig in, we can do it. One more thing, sure, we can do it. And when was the last time your chief pushed back and said, nope, we're not doing that one. No, we're not adapting to that one, because my team's done enough. If you're going to make us do one more thing, you're going to have to take something off our plate. Better still, take two things off our plate. It's as if we're not supposed to take care of ourselves. So you put all that together, and it's really not surprising that that empathy and kindness are lacking in healthcare. And it's not because we're born unkind or unempathic people. And so basically, I used myself as a case example, and I had an MRI of my brain to see if I still had the empathy circuits. I still do, although they're somewhat diminished in certain circumstances. I had my personality assessed, and I discovered that I have some personality quirks that put me at greater risk of potentially putting my own welfare ahead of the welfare of others, I suppose. And then I went around the world looking for some of the kindest people on the planet. And I went to Japan, I went to Brazil, I was all over the place, basically trying to meet people who were known for their extraordinary kindness, and asking the question, why are you kind? Were you born that way, or did circumstances make you kind? And it's really interesting. Often, kindness comes from an experience of deprivation in your early childhood, where maybe it's because your parents split up, or maybe because you were hungry, or because you were lonely, and you reach a fork in the road where you're either going to become embittered by that lack of kindness extended to you, or you're going to use that to empathize with other people in similar circumstances. And those are the people that I interviewed.
Very, very interesting. And my kind of thoughts on that initially are, like, I remember, Brian, when I first did one of my first emergency room shifts in Ontario as a resident. I'm not an emergency room doctor, I'm a family doctor. As a resident, I was sort of being like, I don't want to say overly kind, but I was being like very, very kind to my patients, and I was asking the questions like very, very slowly and attentively, I guess you could say. And eventually someone just kind of said to me, like, listen, like, I know you're like, seem like a nice guy, and I know you think you're doing like the right thing here, but like, we got a lot of patients to see, and you just gotta like speed up, sort of, you know what I mean? And I understood that, and I think they were absolutely right and correct in saying that to me. And the person saying this to me was just an absolute sweetheart themselves. So like, it's not like they were trying to like, be rude or anything like that. But I do think that sometimes in medicine, and not just in medicine, I think with police officers a lot too, you're dealing with sometimes really, really difficult people. And then so you come into medicine or into policing or into another profession with sort of like this kind, empathetic, open heart. And then throughout your career, you meet, criminals, you meet people who don't take care of themselves. And then you just kind of become like a little bit, I guess you could say, hardened, and you could lose some of your empathy. And then you kind of end up thinking that, oh, like those people who are super, nice, they're just like naive, they don't know anything about the world and that kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that you can do both, meaning that, like, I think that you can see, patients fairly quickly, maybe not too quickly. There's obviously got to be some type of balance, but still provide a lot of, empathy to those particular patients. And I don't mean to, put you on the spot. You don't have to use yourself as an example, but can you think of, like, do you think that when you sort of started medicine, you were like, because I knew I was super naive. I was like, I'm going to have the healthiest practice ever. I'm going to have the best patients. None of my patients are going to be diabetic. Everyone's going to exercise. Everyone's going to eat super healthy all the time. And then, obviously I learned very, very quickly that's not how the world works. And that's, way too much of expectation for myself and from my patients. So do you feel that in your life that may have happened a little bit? And do you think that maybe that was why you sort of like questioned your empathy during one stage of your life?
Well, I would say that I was, I think that, my trajectory was a little different from yours. I think that for me, being accused of unkindness, it was interesting because it was part of like a 10 or 15 year cycle in my life where I was accused by a family of unkindness because I did things correctly, but I was brusque, and I was not particularly kind in my demeanor. to this particular family. I saw them as demanding instead of empathizing with their circumstances. And it really took until many years later, when I was, at the bedside of my father, who passed away. He had heart disease. And I experienced the kind of brusqueness from the attending physician that I had extended to this other family. And that was the first time that I connected with their suffering, that I made their experience worse. Now, all that said, and that's what set me on the journey. All that said, sometimes, like, you can't be all things to all people all the time. You can't, as you discovered early in your career when you were doing emergency shifts as a resident, and colleagues were telling you can't spend that much time with every patient. You can only parcel yourself out to so many people in so many different aliquots. And you have to, one of the most important lessons I learned in the book is that you must take care of yourself first. You can't, if you don't take care of yourself and you're giving it all to your patients, you're going to become a martyr. And eventually in middle age, you're going to be burnt out, and you're going to be pissed off, and you'll have that angry look that some of our 50-year-old colleagues have, that look like, I signed up for this, I signed up for this. I'm so angry and I don't even know what to do with my anger. Whereas if you have outlets for exercise and for mindfulness and appreciating, and I don't want to be glib there, but just taking care of yourself.
Absolutely.
Then you have a wellspring of kindness for other people. And taking care of yourself means also taking care of yourself emotionally. It means compassion for yourself. It means forgiving yourself for the mistakes you make, because you're going to make those mistakes because you're human, and empathizing with yourself. And instead of abnegating yourself and kind of treating yourself as this despicable other that you just wish you could kick out of yourself because you're so damn ashamed of yourself. And by the way, that's another thing that's important.
Did you talk about that in your TED Talk? I don't mean to interrupt, and I should have mentioned that.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
At the beginning of the show. So, Brian also gave a TED Talk. I'm not sure how long ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
No, but 2010.
2010. Okay,
yeah,
so way 12 years ago. And it was that physicians make mistakes, and we should be okay with that.
Can we talk about that? Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, like, you do have to have, empathy. Like, luckily, like, as far as I know in my medical career, I haven't made any major medical mistakes yet. But, if I'm sure I've made some minor ones, and for those, I have to understand that, like, I'm human, I'm going to make mistakes, and that if I'm kind to myself with those mistakes, that's actually going to make me better as a physician in the long run, as opposed to if I'm extremely hard on myself, then it kind of narrows me down into that rigid mindset again. And I think that when you are more empathetic, you're more open, and again, you're more open to learning. And when you're more open to learning, I think that's how you can improve as a physician.
Well, Mike, I do want to say one thing about that. It's hard to be open. And you cannot. I'm going to make a declarative statement. If one suffers from shame-proneness, that means that, and I mean, when I say shame, I mean the Brene Brown definition of shame, which is that awful feeling that you have. It's both a physical and an emotional state that occurs when you are in fear that the discovery of your mistake will result in you being excluded from the group. So it's a fear of being excluded from the group. And in this case, it's your group of medical colleagues. And when you are in, like not everybody is shame prone. And I'm not saying that if you aren't shame prone, you must be a sociopath, because there are sociopaths in medicine, people who can don't care, actually have no empathy for their patients and don't care for their patients, and don't feel bad when they harm their patients. They're out there. But what I'm talking about is the vast majority of us who aren't sociopathic, some of us are more shame prone than others. And if you are shame prone, you are closed to discovering your errors. You're terrified that people will discover your errors, because if they do, it's oblivion. It's it's suicide for your practice. It's suicide for your well-being. And not everybody feels that kind of gathering, awful feeling inside. It's like a total body reaction. I know it because I experienced it. I still do to some extent. And when you experience that, it is impossible to empathize with others because you are so focused on your own distress that it's impossible for you to imagine what it's like to be somebody else. That's the definition of empathy, being able to cognitively imagine, use your imagination to imagine what it's like to be someone else, to be in the position of someone else. You cannot do that. It's like the difference between a sun that radiates and a black hole that pulls, whose gravitational force pulls all the sunlight in. And that's what you are. That's the state that you're in when you're suffering from toxic shame. There are ways to deal with toxic shame. The most important way is to neutralize your fear of having your mistakes discovered by talking about your mistakes. So that's what Doctors Make Mistakes. Can we talk about that? That's what my TED Talk was all about. I didn't know it at the time, but it was. So by declaring, and I can tell you, I went to universities. I went to Vanderbilt University and talked to senior medical students as a result of that TED Talk. And when I started talking about my mistakes, I asked, what did you think? One of them said, well, I think you're a shitty doctor. No, that's exactly what people are, that's your, so and I said, that's great. You verbalized my worst fear.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not just the sum total of the 9 mistakes I've made in my career. In fact, I can't tell you how many people I've saved because of the mistakes I've made. Every good thing I said in the TED Talk, every good thing I've ever done on this earth has come one way or another from a mistake I've made. We don't embrace the mistakes that we make enough. And we tend to unfortunately, that's changing, but not fast enough. We tend to see our mistakes as the end of the road.
Just an opportunity to learn. And
exactly.
One really important point that I want to make there, Brian, that I think that you kind of said in some ways, but I think it's just critically important is in terms of empathy. It seems like step one in empathy is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Is that accurate?
That's true. Yeah. Yep, that's true.
Okay. And then, Brian, I know we only have about 10 minutes left, and so I don't know how much we're going to get through. I just want to ask you, a couple questions on COVID, if that's
sure,
okay.
Go ahead. Yep.
We're both in Ontario, and obviously, we're both dealing with the same restrictions, lifting of restrictions and all that kind of stuff. So they just announced recently that they're going to end the mask mandate. I think it's not this Monday, but next Monday. Do you think that we're doing it too early? Do you think we're doing it too late? Or do you think this is the perfect time to maybe get rid of the masks?
Well, I am not the world's expert on where we are regarding the B2 variant of Omicron, subvariant of Omicron. I think that there are certainly jurisdictions that went wide open, like Denmark, and when they did, they had a much higher rate of infections. And as you know, I don't have to explain this to you or to our colleagues, that the larger the denominator of people infected, the more, like, if even a tiny percentage of them require hospitalization, we could threaten the hospital system. I hope that, in fact, we're so far past the peak that it's on its way out. But if you're looking for a warning, look no further than Hong Kong. Right now, Hong Kong is a disaster. They had, early on, the first 2 waves of the pandemic, they had 13,000 cases of COVID and something like, a handful of deaths, like 30 to 50 deaths. I don't remember the exact number. Today, with Omicron and B2, they have had 500,000 cases and 3,400 deaths. You can imagine what that's doing to the hospital system in Hong Kong.
Are they as vaccinated as us, Brian?
Pardon?
Are they as vaccinated as
No,
Canadians?
they're not as vaccinated as we are. And that makes a difference. They've been slow in their vaccination program. And yes, the fact that we are vaccinated, more vaccinated, but I can tell you, you probably know this, there has been a slower uptake of the 3rd dose than we wanted. And there's still a pretty significant number of people who could end up getting COVID and perhaps spreading it to other people because they haven't gotten a third dose. And I know I don't want to get into arguments about how much a third dose will prevent transmissibility. And I know that there are critics who are saying it not all that much, but we do know at the very least we have to reduce the potential for hospitalizations because we've seen the system getting clogged up. Now it's far less. If you look at Ontario, for instance, the number of people with COVID who are hospitalized right now, the number of people in ICU is a very good number, and it's on its way down, and we want it to keep going down. So I have to say, time will tell. It's the worst journalistic trope that you can use. I hope it doesn't go back up again.
Yeah, because we don't know if another variant will come out. Like right now, it looks like in Canada anyway, and particularly in Ontario, but I think most of Canada, like we're doing, pretty good. I think most people are happy with how things are going, and we're happy that we're at the level that we have now. But we do know that things, could get worse. And I just have a couple more questions for you, Brian, if that's okay.
Sure.
So if someone is double vaxxed and then they got Omicron, would you say to that person that they wouldn't need a third dose? Or do you think that even if you got double vaxxed and got Omicron, that you should still get a third dose? And I know that this is a difficult question. There's so many different opinions on this, but I'm just curious what your opinion is.
I think once they've recovered from the infection, they should get the third dose. It certainly isn't going to harm them. And Lord knows we've got plenty of vaccine to give to them. There seems to be some qualitative differences. I have to say that we have been disappointed with the capacity of prior infection to prevent future hospitalizations as the variants change. It hasn't been as powerful. It's not like measles where if you get measles, you don't need the measles vaccine. So my advice would be to get the third dose when at the appropriate period of time after you've recovered.
Okay. And then last question too. I know we kind of joked about it briefly before the show. So with ivermectin, again, I wouldn't say stop talking about it completely there for a while, but because of and I'm sure you're very familiar with the Cochrane review that was done this past summer, so 2021 summer. I don't know the exact date it came out, but sometime this summer. And then it said basically, there's no benefit. And then there was actually a second meta-analysis done. I don't know the authors of that study. I think it came out around October or November, and basically said the same thing, that there's no use for this drug. And then, but we still have these studies that come out. So my approach to it has always been I don't think we should recommend it to people. I don't think it should be standard of care. But just because it's so benign overall, that if somebody wanted access to it, I think it would be reasonable to grant them access to it if they requested it, and if there was no contraindications, which I don't think there basically ever is. I think there's been something like 4 billion doses of ivermectin given in the world, ever, and there's been something like 22 adverse reactions or something like that. So my thing, if ivermectin was had a bunch of adverse reactions, I wouldn't even be discussing it at all. It just seems that the risk benefit ratio, and even though the benefit may not be exceedingly high, it still appears to me in some way that the risk benefit ratio is still favor towards perhaps using ivermectin. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, and I'm very happy to be corrected on this. I'm just looking for the truth.
I'm not here to correct you, and I'm not here to contradict you. I'm just telling you that if somebody asked me about ivermectin, should they take it, my view would be that it has not been shown to have any value, and the idea that it isn't harmful, so you might as well take it. If it provide, at the very least, you'd be depriving the agricultural, market from of a supply of ivermectin, and the fact that people have been taking it has led to shortages. I don't see any value in it, and I certainly wouldn't endorse the use of ivermectin under any circumstances based on the evidence that we have. It had its moment when people thought it might be helpful in uncontrolled studies, but it's passing strange to look at, for instance, the Cochrane review and say, if the Cochrane review says, well, we don't believe in the Cochrane review. I mean, I think that when usually in most corridors of medicine, if a Cochrane review says something doesn't work, then it doesn't work, and unless there's compelling evidence otherwise, then they can do another Cochrane review at that point. So those are my views.
Okay, excellent. And then I know I said last question, but I promise this is my last one. Do you think there's any value in giving out a public message to people to make sure that they're supplementing with vitamin D, particularly during the winter time when you're living in Canada? Do you think that may have had some favorable outcomes on COVID?
On COVID, I don't know enough about the connection. Vitamin D has certainly been touted as a treatment for, as something that can be helpful in a whole bunch of different conditions. Some of them have continued to remain intriguing. Others have been kind of kicked to the curb. But I'm certainly not an expert on the value of vitamin D in COVID.
Okay. Well, I know I've taken up all of your time that I requested today, Brian. So thank you so much for coming on the show. You've been a wealth of knowledge, shared a lot of great things. I really appreciate your insights into your books and, communication. I think that's, fantastic, and also much needed in medicine. I say this sincerely, that I really hope they even build some of your principles into the medical curriculum. Maybe you're working on that now behind the scenes, but don't want to tell us about it or something. But I think that a lot of things that you've said would definitely be a lot of value in medicine and in medical school. So I appreciate all of your comments today, and if you're ever up for it, I'd love to have you back on the show. So thanks so much again for coming on.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Okay, see you, Brian.
Bye now.
Awesome.
It was good.
Good.
Fantastic. Yeah. Let me put on my
and I meant what I said there too, Brian. If you ever want to come back on, I'd love to have you back on. I think that went really well.
Good. Let's see how the